Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Andy Woods. Today is February the 3rd, 2023. This is Pastor's Point of View number 242. I'm back with my friend, colleague, fellow elder, associate pastor, Dr. Jim McGowan, and we're going to just jump right in here, folks, with our prophecy update for today. You'll notice our outline. We've got 6 topics that we're going to try to cover today in rapid fire because there's a lot going on in the culture war and also a lot going on that's prophetically significant, and we want to do our best to bring you up to speed. We typically like to begin our prophecy updates with a focus on Israel because that's God's timepiece for the end times. And notice what the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verse 27 says.
All right, folks, again, reading out of the New American Standard 95 update, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate.
So that's our famous prophecy about the coming 7-year tribulation period.
Yes.
And you'll notice it begins with a firm covenant between Israel and the he. The he we think is the Antichrist.
Yes.
And we have this on chart form. Notice this Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 overview. You'll notice that the tribulation period begins with a covenant between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel. And when Israel enters into this covenant, the Bible describes it as she's entering into a pact with hell itself.
Yes.
And we find that in Isaiah 28, verse 15 and verse 18. What do those verses say?
Isaiah chapter 28, verses 15 through 18. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by. For we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception. Your covenant with death will be canceled, and your pact with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you become its trampling place.
Now, this covenant that's coming could be coerced on Israel.
Yes. Yes.
Forced on her by a power presumably bigger than her from the outside. Mm-hmm. And we think that power is arising ultimately in Europe. Notice this chart here. We call it the little horn slide. It kind of looks like a funnel. And it tells you who the nearest antecedent of the he is. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it's Titus, who was Roman.
Yes.
So, basically what we think is someone coming from Roman descent is going to come upon Israel and sort of coerce her into this covenant. And so what we see is our world right now being fit into that identical blueprint. You'll notice this article from Israel National News, January 30th, 2023. It deals with an attack that happened over the weekend in a neighborhood in Jerusalem.
Yes.
In which 7 Israelis were murdered. And what's interesting is the response of Macron, the leader of France. I would argue he's sort of the presumptive leader of Europe and the New World Order for that reason, or for that matter. And he is telling Israel what to do in the midst of being attacked. Yeah. And if you can just read those underlined portions there.
French President Emmanuel Macron called for restraint after the latest violence, reported to AFP. He recalled the need for he recalled the need for all to avoid measures likely to feed the spiral of violence and readiness to contribute to the resumption of dialogue between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
So look at his mindset. Israel, you need to show restraint.
Yeah. Calm down, Israel.
They've just been victimized by an attack resulting in the death of 7 Israelis in Jerusalem.
Unbelievable.
And then he makes this statement that you need to be ready to contribute to the dialogue between the Palestinians and the Israelis. In other words, the reason these attacks are happening is these people aren't pacified because you haven't given enough territory yet.
Exactly.
And so, this is a scenario that Israel is being forced to live under. Mm-hmm. That no other nation would have to put up with.
That's
I mean, could you imagine when 9/11 happened here in the United States? Some leader from Europe would come along and say, "Okay, United States, be prepared to enter into an agreement where you got to give up some of your land, or else everybody wouldn't be upset with you.
Yeah.
And you need to show restraint."
Yes.
I mean, basically, what Israel is being forced to do is to not act like a country. Mm-hmm. That any other country in the world, would act like when she is, attacked against her will.
Yeah.
And so I guess my point is this is the identical scenario that the Bible predicts for the end times with this coerced covenant, coming from Macron, presumably speaking for Europe. In fact, here is something from the European Union Times. We've used this slide before at the end of 2022, and it says, French President Macron, we need a single global order to avoid war. So he, I guess, is the spokesperson for the New World Order.
Yeah.
Coming from Europe, imposing upon Israel his will from the outside, not even allowing her to defend herself, in the midst of an attack from terrorism.
And of course, when he made this statement, he wasn't thinking about himself, right?
Yes, that's right. And so, everything that Daniel 9:27 predicts, Isaiah 28 predicts, the psychology is completely in place.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I guess my point is we must be getting ever closer to
Amen, brother.
the 70th week of Daniel. Well, another subject, and let's go to our second bullet point here that we like to talk about. I don't know if we like to talk about it, but
We're forced to.
we're forced to talk about it, is the subject of globalism. And we know that there is going to be in the end times a one world government. If the Bible isn't clear on this, I don't think it's clear on anything.
Yes.
Notice what Daniel 7 verse 23 says.
Daniel 7:23, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it.
The whole earth being treaded down and crushed, devoured. That's the final form of Gentile rule that will exist on planet Earth before Jesus returns, at the end of the 7-year tribulation period. And so if we're moving close to this scenario, then we ought to see more talk about world government.
Yeah.
And of course, we see that now all of the time.
Yes.
Al Gore, you'll notice what he said back in his book, Earth in the Balance, back in, 1992. Remind us what he said there.
All right. According to Al Gore, quote, we must make the rescue of the environment the central organizing principle for civilization.
So they picked the environment because they want to save the planet, supposedly. And what that means is control capitalism, control individual behavior, because if we don't do that, the planet's going to heat up too fast or cool down too fast.
Right.
And they're using this as sort of a rubric or a pretext to force one world globalism on people.
Yes.
This climate change issue is a global problem, and so we need a global answer. And their answer is everybody has to come under the authority economically of some global institution to micromanage our lives on behalf of saving the planet. So we just got finished with this meeting that took place at the World Economic Forum, and we had two of our former presidential candidates speak. One of them is Al Gore, the other one is John Kerry. And here it is, decades after Gore wrote that in 92, and these two guys are still sounding off. So help us with that article.
Once a loser, always a loser,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Remind us of some of the speeches that these two gave. This is an article from the Daily Signal, January 26, 2023.
All right, this is entitled Gore, Kerry Embarrass U.S. at World Economic Forum. Thank God these globalist grifters never became president. Yeah. That wasn't me, that's the article.
Yeah.
And here's the article. We're quoting from select portions of this. This was at the World Economic Forum last week. Al Gore, quoting, "We're still putting 162 million tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every single day, and the accumulated amount is now trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth." He added, "That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs, and sucking the moisture out of the land, and creating the droughts, and melting the ice, and raising the sea level, and causing these waves of climate refugees. Look at the xenophobia and political authoritarian trends that have come out, or have come from just a few million climate refugees," he raged. "What about 1 billion? We could lose our capacity for self-governance on the earth. We have to act."
Yeah, just interrupting you there for a second. Notice is we have to act. Global governance, in other words. Notice this expression, climate refugees.
Yes.
So people should get that fixed in their vocabulary. Here we go. We've got a new set of refugees called climate refugees. And then, of course, anybody that's against this he uses a psychological language. You're xenophobic.
Right.
And, of course, Al Gore has been making predictions like this for a long time. His track record isn't too good. The article says in 2006, for example, he forecast that within the decade there would be no more snows in Kilimanjaro. In 2009, he predicted the North Pole will be ice-free in the summer of 2013 because of man-made global warming. You know, it's kind of interesting. We've got in our camp, very sadly, date setters.
We do.
And every time they sound off, they get rebuked because they're always wrong, and they deserve to be rebuked.
Amen.
I mean, isn't this guy in his camp, saving the planet, a date setter?
I would say
He's
so.
setting a date for the apocalypse.
Two right there.
And the other thing is he really doesn't practice the same rules that he preaches for others. Can you pick it up right here where it talks about an analysis?
An analysis from the National Center for Public Policy Research at the time found that Gore's Nashville, Tennessee home was consuming vastly more energy than the average dwelling. The report claimed that Gore's home energy consumption averaged 19,241 kilowatt hours per month, fully 34 times as much as the average home's usage of 901 kilowatts per month. According to the research center's calculations, Gore guzzles more electricity in 1 year than the average American family uses in 21 years.
So he's preaching this climate change, control economic behavior, that he lives in a house that's fully 34 times as much as the average home usage in terms of kilowatts, usage of 901 kilowatts per hour. In other words, the guy's just a raging hypocrite.
Absolutely.
And as much as he crusades against free market capitalism, the article says in his post-vice president career, it's been extremely lucrative as he's been preaching environmental issues, enabling him to amass a personal fortune estimated at $330 million, according to the Daily Mail. And of course, Gore's not the only one sounding off. So is former presidential candidate John Kerry, who is Joseph Biden's climate envoy. Can you pick it up here with this quote right here? This is John Kerry now speaking.
Yeah, quoting John Kerry. When you start to think about it, it's pretty extraordinary that we select group of human beings because of whatever touched us at some point in our lives, are able to sit in a room and come together and actually talk about saving the planet. I mean, it's so almost extraterrestrial to think about saving the planet, Kerry said. If you say that to most people think you're just crazy, a crazy tree-hugging lefty liberal, do-gooder or whatever, and there's no relationship. But really, that's where we are.
So it's a religious language. I mean, these people at Davos, Kerry and Gore, think that they're saving the planet, and yet they compiled quite a carbon footprint just getting over to the ski resort in Switzerland and Davos to talk about this. Can you pick it up right here?
Kerry and Gore and the rest of the elitist cabal where they were was an alpine village flown there on more than 1,000 private jets, according to a study commissioned by Greenpeace International, Yahoo News reported. The carbon dioxide emissions from these extra flights were equal to putting roughly 350,000 gasoline-powered cars on the road for the same week-long period. He once defended his Godzilla-sized carbon footprint when asked about his having traveled to Iceland by private jet in 2019, ironically, to receive an environmental award. Quoting, he said, "If you offset your carbon, it's the only choice for somebody like me who is traveling the world to win this battle." He said, "I believe the time it takes me to get somewhere. I can't sail across the ocean. I have to fly, meet with people, and get things done." But Kerry did acknowledge that the lifestyle sacrifice he demands the rest of us make won't make much of a difference in the fight against the phantom menace of climate change. On January 27, 2021, he acknowledged the Biden administration's rejoining the flawed Paris Climate Agreement. Alone is not enough. Not when 90% of all the planet's global emissions come from outside of U.S. borders. We could go to zero tomorrow, he says, and the problem isn't solved.
So these guys they just have one message. The message is nations, give up your sovereignty, and the private sector and individual consumers control your behavior to, quote, save the planet. But wait a minute, Al and John, didn't we go under the Paris Climate Accord? Trump took us out of it.
Yeah.
Biden put us right back into it. That's not enough. You got to do more. And is it going to do any good? Well, what's sort of interesting is a lot of these globalists own some beachfront property.
No.
So if they're worried about the oceans rising, what are they buying, beachfront property for? That's something to consider. So it's obvious that this is not going to do anything to fix the environment.
No.
This is all about controlling the masses, and they concede that. And the rules that they are so glib that everyone else is to follow, they don't follow. They don't even follow them when they fly over to these places to talk about these issues.
They're a select group, Pastor.
That's right. And so this is how Marxism always works.
Always.
These people have absolutely no intention of living under the same rules that they impose on everybody else.
Right.
When Marxism gets a foothold, there's always one set of rules for the party elites and another set of rules for everybody else.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it shouldn't surprise us too much because the Bible says that in the last days we're going to be forced into this one world, sort of paradigm, and you sort of see it forming. There's another interesting prophecy about this in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 25. What does that say?
Daniel 7:25, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time.
So the Antichrist, when he comes forward over this one world government, is going to make alterations in times and in law. Now, it's just a matter of trying to figure out where that expression is used. And I believe a very similar expression is found in the book of Genesis.
Yes.
And I think this is the fourth day where God himself calls himself the author of the times and the law. But remind us of what Genesis 1 verse 14 says.
Genesis 1:14, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years.
So who creates the times and the law? God does.
Absolutely.
And so when it says the Antichrist is going to try to make alterations in times and law, what it's saying is he's going to build a world that erases completely God's influence and pretends like God was never there to begin with.
Yeah.
So with all of that being said, what is happening in Europe, what is largely happening in the United States, is they're almost taking out an eraser and erasing all original existence
Yes.
of the Judeo-Christian underpinnings of civilization.
Right.
So with all of that being said, we should see preparation for that, and I think that kind of thing's already underway. We have this article from the Christian Post about the very influential school, the London School of Economics, and it says the London School of Economics strips Christian words like Lent and Easter from the calendar. I don't even know if those words are all that Christian to begin with, but in their opinion, they remind them of Christianity. So we have to have a school system that pretends like those words don't exist anymore.
Right.
As if you can just take out a magic marker and an eraser and erase history. But
Right.
help us with that article about the London School of Economics.
Doing the whole thing here?
Yeah, just read the first two paragraphs, and then I'll make some comments when we get to the third
All right.
paragraph.
The London School of Economics said it is doing away with Christian words for its semester names to provide a more international atmosphere. Starting next year, the Michaelmas term will be renamed as autumn term, the Christmas break as winter break, Lent term as winter term, and Easter break as spring break. Michaelmas marks the feast of St. Michael, the Archangel, one of the most important saints in the Catholic and Anglican churches, and is celebrated on September 29th. The Telegraph reported, the university added, these new names use more accessible and widely recognized terminology and better reflect the international nature of our community and our broader global engagement. Toby Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, said the university's decision to strip Christian words from semester names reflects the fact that the LSE, that's the what was it over here?
London School of
Economics, like most British universities, is in thrall to a new religious cult, the Church of Woke, that is far more dogmatic than Christianity. And that was reported by LBC News.
Yeah, and just for the sake of time, let me interrupt you for a second. It talks about how not only is the influential London School of Economics moving this way, but all of Europe is moving this way. And the third paragraph down mentions the other schools in the area, University Brighton, advice to staff not to say Christmas, but instead to refer to it as the winter closure period, because they don't want to use Christocentric terms. Worcester College at Oxford University issued an apology to students in 2021 after hosting a training session by a group Christian Concern and canceled subsequent reservations due to complaints of a few students. You've got the Fitzwilliam College at Cambridge University canceled an event for young Christian professionals, saying that the values of the organizers who do not support same-sex marriage were not compatible with the values of the college. It goes on and it talks about how currently Christians now account for less than half of the population in England and Wales,
Yeah.
46.2%, according to a British newspaper. It talks about the Church of England, relaxing its former stand against homosexual marriage.
Yeah.
And see, this is the alterations of the times and the laws,
It is.
that the Bible anticipates will coming. I would think the Antichrist will show up and make things even a lot worse. Than they already are. And people say, that's Europe. But I want people to understand something. Europe is our future. If things don't change here in the United States, exactly what's happening in Europe is going to continue. I think it's already happening in the United States, and it's going to actually get far worse. What would you say?
No, I just say that's exactly right, because whatever happens in Europe finds its way here.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, with all that being said, let's move away from globalism into our third bullet point here, persecution. Notice Revelation chapter 17, verse 6 and verse 15, the one world harlot coming from the city of Babylon in the last days. What do those verses predict?
Revelation 17, verses 6 and 15. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues.
The influence of the harlot is over the whole face of the earth.
Yes.
Verse 15, and then it talks about this harlot drunk with the blood of the saints. So obviously, if the Bible means what it says and says what it means as we get closer to the end of the age, persecution worldwide against God's people will ramp up substantially.
Yes.
In fact, we have a couple of scriptures dealing with that. One of them is in Matthew 24, verse 9. What does that say?
Matthew 24:9 says, Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name.
Yeah, and then another one that predicts that is in Revelation 6, 9 through 11. What does that say?
Revelation 6, 9 through 11, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe. And they were told that they should rest for a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also.
So those two passages, Matthew 24 and Revelation 6, those come from the birth pangs.
Yes.
And the seal judgments, and we actually have a chart that we like to use showing you sort of the interplay between the seal judgments and the birth pangs.
Yes.
And you'll notice on the chart there, number 5, martyrdoms, is predicted by Jesus in Matthew 24, verses 9 through 13, and it's predicted in the fifth seal judgment, Revelation 6, 9 through 11. You just read the passages, and then we sometimes use this chart here, the first 6 seal judgments of Revelation, and you look at number 5 there, and it's martyrdoms.
Sure is.
So if I'm understanding Bible prophecy correctly, I mean, persecution is supposed to increase globally against God's people.
Right.
And I would say this, Brother Jim, persecution is increasing right here in the late great United States of America. Look
Sure
no
is.
further than this article from the Christian Post concerning Jack Phillips.
Back in the news.
And as Yogi Berra said, it's deja vu all over again.
Yep.
Colorado Appeals Court rules against Jack Phillips' masterpiece cake shop in trans cake case. January 26, 2023. Help us with that article.
A 3-judge panel of the Colorado Court of Appeals has ruled against Christian baker Jack Phillips, having concluded that he was wrong to refuse on religious grounds to bake a cake celebrating transgenderism. In a decision released Thursday, Judge Timothy Schultz authored the panel's opinion affirming an earlier trial court decision against Philip, concluding that the baker violated the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act by not creating a cake to celebrate a person's new trans identity. A complaint was lodged against Phillips and Masterpiece Cake Shop after a man who self-identified as a woman and changed his name to Autumn Scardina demanded that the baker create a cake with the colors of the trans flag in pink and blue frosting to celebrate Scardina's self-professed sexual identity. Quoting, Scardina testified he requested a custom pink and blue cake with no message or other design elements. The trial court found that Deborah agreed to make that cake, but then retracted the commitment once Scardina told her what the cake was for, wrote Schultz. Quoting, it was only after Scardina disclosed that he was transgender and intended to use the cake to celebrate both his birthday and his transition that Masterpiece and Phillips refused to provide the cake. Thus, it was Scardina's transgender status and his desire to use the cake in celebration of that status that caused Masterpiece and Phillips to refuse to provide the cake. The appeals court rejected Phillips' claims that he was being forced to convey a message that went against his beliefs because the cake he was asked to make, quote, expressed no message, adding that not all conduct constitutes speech. Phillips had previously won a United States Supreme Court case in 2018 that centered on his refusal to bake a wedding cake that celebrated a same-sex marriage in 2012, when same-sex marriage was not legal in Colorado. The Alliance Defending Freedom, which is representing Phillips, denounced the appeals court decision and vowed to appeal it, considering part of a broader campaign of harassment against the Christian baker.
So this man who is an evangelical Christian and doesn't want to use his skill, his creative skills to promote lifestyles that the Bible speaks against, is being targeted. Mm-hmm. He's being made an example of. This is round 2 because they already went through all this stuff earlier, and now that was the homosexual issue. Now the trans community.
Couldn't get him on that one.
Yeah, now the trans community is after him. And I want people to understand that the punishment, even if he's vindicated, and I hope he is, he certainly wasn't vindicated by this court. No. Which was what the district court or the appeals court. But even if he's vindicated, he's still being punished because the punishment is the process.
Exactly right.
Because he's got to spend all this money and be dragged through the mud just to defend his constitutional rights. And what's happening is they are coercing speech out of this man. A clear, obvious violation of the First Amendment.
Right.
It would be like going into a Jewish-owned establishment as a Nazi and saying, I need you to make a cake for me for my Nazi celebration and put a swastika on it.
Right.
And no, I can't do that. We've got Holocaust survivors in my family tree or family chain. Well, it doesn't matter. We're going to coerce you to do it against your will. I mean, that's essentially what's happening. And if they can do that to a cake baker, what could they do to a Christian pastor?
Sure.
Down the road. So this is not going to just stop with, members of the creative industry. And the other thing I would point out is you notice how they never do this to Muslim bakery owners?
No, they don't.
They're only targeting evangelical Christians because Muslims have a much stronger stand because if you're a homosexual in a Muslim country, you're basically thrown off a 2-story building.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Muslim stand against homosexuality is far greater than the Christian stand, and they never, ever target a Muslim bakery. They only target an evangelical Christian, and so I believe this is the beginning largely of the persecution of the last days coming to the United States.
What happened to, what you used to see all throughout the United States for years and years, no shirt, no shoes, no service?
Yeah.
What happened to that?
Well, I guess that doesn't exist anymore. And cheer up, folks. It actually gets a little worse. although this one has more of a happy ending. This comes from Breitbart. Pro-life activist Mark Houck found not guilty of violating the FACE Act. And, you know, just to kind of make a long story short here, because this is a lengthy article, basically this man is a devout Roman Catholic, and he, as part of his ministry, I think for 20 years, he goes out and he tries to convince people in the city of Philadelphia, next to one of these abortion mills. He tries to do sidewalk counseling, and he tries to convince them, you know, not to come in and have an abortion if a woman is pregnant. And so what has been passed in 1993 is what's called the FACE Act, which says you can't physically obstruct a woman who's coming in to have an abortion. And, and he's saying, well, I'm not physically obstructing anybody. It's just a conversation. Well, what happened is some of these pro-abortion protesters, and interestingly, when you watch the video on it, and I've watched it.
Yeah, me too.
It doesn't take place at the entrance of an abortion clinic.
No.
It's removed. But a couple of these abortion protesters, one of them in particular that's had a history of doing this, goes up to his son, his young son, who's 12 years old,
12,
and gets in his face and starts saying some extremely obscene things that we couldn't even repeat on pastor's point of view. And so Mr. Houck goes to the individual and says, I want you to leave my son alone. The guy doesn't leave the son alone. And so what he does is he pushes him back. So that all of a sudden now is viewed in the eyes of the law as a, you know, physically obstructing a woman from entering an abortion clinic. And what happens is 15 FBI or DOJ cars show up at his house at 6:45 in the morning. And they basically put him in chains. They take him away.
In front of his family.
In front of his family. And what does he have? 6, 7, 8, 9 kids. And, you know, he's saying, hey, you guys are violating my constitutional rights. Well, fortunately, in this particular case, what was it? The district court holds in his favor that his constitutional rights had been violated. And so it's real tempting in these kind of situations to say, aha, the system worked. America is free. But here's the reality of the situation is this type of thing should have never escalated ever to this level.
Oh, absolutely not. Because
what he did in terms of protecting his own son, by any reasonable reading, is not a violation of the FACE Act.
Not at all.
And, you know, beyond that, he wasn't even near a clinic entrance. And what you're seeing, because the feds are willing now under Biden, the Biden regime,
this is the Biden administration,
to push things to this level, is they're now weaponizing the Department of Justice.
Yes, they are.
And they're using the Department of Justice, you know, kind of in a way to, you know, punish people for their particular political ideology. And what you have to understand about the left is the right to have an abortion is sacrosanct. That's why they're all interested in these bubble zones, like the lady in the UK who was praying in front of the abortion clinic.
Silently.
Yes, silently got arrested. And they don't want any interference with abortion whatsoever, to the point where they're willing to, you know, prosecute, you know, this type of individual here. And in the process, they're ignoring the terrorism, which is actually a violation of the FACE Act, or similar acts, I should say.
Pastor, this had to be an intentional effort on the part of this guy, because, you know, he went to this little boy. And if you see the video, I mean, he's in his face.
Yes.
And, I mean, I'd step between him and my child, too.
As any normal parent would.
Of course you would.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, as they're pursuing people like this, who are, in my view, the salt and light of the earth, what he's trying to do, they're ignoring the true terrorism created by BLM, Black Lives Matter, all the burning. That's what BLM stands for, by the way, burning, looting, and murder. We saw that a couple of summers ago. And they're ignoring the group Jane's Revenge that has actually gone out and committed actual acts of violence and destruction of private property because they're upset
Against churches.
against churches, etc., because Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Yeah.
And they admit in this particular article, and unfortunately it's too long to read, that this FACE Act has been used very selectively
Yes.
in the vast majority of cases against pro-life people.
Surprise.
And anybody else with a different political ideology, is sort of given a free pass. But is this not, this kind of thing, even getting to this level here in the United States, is this not the beginning of the persecution of Christians in the United States?
Right.
The very thing the Bible
Stage setting.
warns us about in the last days?
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
the setting of the stage, as
Yeah.
you say. So with that being said, let's go quickly to our fourth bullet point here, and it has to do with cashless. As a jumping off point, we like to read Revelation 13, 16 through 18. What does that say?
Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 18. And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the freemen and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666.
So this clearly predicts three things: a cashless economy, a surveillance society, which we're going to talk about
Yes.
in a few moments. And to me, it reads like one world Marxism, where you really have no privacy
Yeah.
or property rights whatsoever, and your whole life, cradle to grave, is micromanaged by world government. So let's sort of take these one by one. First of all, cashless. There's a reason the globalists are always pushing us in this cashless direction. Once transactions become digitized, they can track everything you do. Hey, do you go to that church, and do you give money to that church where that guy went to, Mr. Houck, that stands in front of tries to counsel, women
much
against
did you
having an
give 'em?
abortion? How much did you give? And your credit score will start to go down, and your opportunities in life will be dried up. And they can't do that unless they move everything to digital transactions. That's why they're always pushing over and over again, cashless, cashless, cashless. Here's something that we've reported on before by the Cointelegraph. New York Fed launches a 12-week CBDC pilot program with major banks. That's a central bank digital currency. That's a cashless system. Here's an article from Decrypt that we've reported on before. Nigeria limits cash withdrawals to $45 per day
Holy cow.
in CBDC digital banking push. And here is something I don't think we've reported on before. This comes from the World Economic Forum, February of last year. Dethroning cash as king. How digital payments are enabling a shift away from the cash economy. And then all of a sudden, what appears in our news feeds is this article from Zero Hedge, January 23rd, 2023. It says big banks prepare to launch digital wallet to compete with Apple Pay and PayPal. What does that say?
All right, you want me to read the whole thing? Or
Just the underlined portions.
Major U.S. banks, including Wells Fargo, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, and others, will push into the digital wallet space in the second half of this year to take on Apple Pay and PayPal. Early Warning Services, LLC, EWS, the bank-owned company that operates the money transfer service Zelle, will be managing the new digital wallet, according to WSJ. The move towards electronic and contactless payments has been gradual, but could soon be thrown into hyperdrive if enough consumers adopt EWS's new wallet. It was during the coronavirus pandemic when the government, Federal Reserve, and corporations urged people to avoid unnecessary physical transactions that increased the push toward a cashless society.
So there it is. As they're moving in this direction with this digital wallet, it's more in the trajectory of a cashless economy,
Just what we've been saying.
what the Bible anticipates. And let's move from that to a related subject, the surveillance society. That's something else that you see in Revelation 13, 16 through 18, where essentially what's happening is technology that was used against America's enemies is now being turned on American citizens.
Yes.
For example, the Patriot Act, remember that?
Yes, I do.
When that passed under the Bush administration, this would be Bush number 2. That was all done as, hey, we got to root out Islamic terrorism in the United States. Well, what's happened is now the Patriot Act has been turned on the Patriots, where the January 6th protesters are now rotting away in prison with their constitutional rights in suspension because of the Patriot Act. So what was originally advertised as we're going to use this against America's enemies is now being turned on American citizens. And that's why I found this particular article in WorldNet Daily by Bob Unruh very interesting. January 26, 2023. Artificial intelligence used by feds to track ISIS is now targeting conservative Americans.
Conservative Americans.
Conservative Americans.
Wow.
So help us with that. You can just read the underlining if you don't mind.
The United States government back in the day fought misinformation by being spread by ISIS by creating military-grade artificial intelligence that quickly identified and censored the ideologies the radicals were disseminating. Now, the feds plan to adapt that tech so that Americans who dissent from the politically correct lines on jab safety and election integrity also can be censored. They were used during the Arab Spring uprisings when the turbulence on the Middle East, in the Middle East spawned ISIS. The report said back then the idea was to track and minimize the impact of dissidents who wanted to overthrow U.S.-friendly regimes. DARPA's objectives included to detect and classify the spread of ideas or memes and deceptive messaging and the identity and to identify the persuasion campaign structures.
Yeah, so in other words, if this technology was originally designed to be used in the Arab Spring, Middle Eastern terrorism, ISIS, to prevent them from putting out, disinformation on the internet. Well, now the same technology is being used against those who happen to hold to a narrative which goes against the narrative that the government is trying to promote concerning health issues.
Yeah.
If you don't think the right way concerning the voting process, then we're going to apply this technology to you to censor your viewpoint. And so what was originally designed for America's enemies, just like the Patriot Act,
Same old thing.
is now being used against American citizens. I believe to a very large extent this is the beginning of the surveillance society that the Bible anticipates for the last days. And then very quickly, one other thing, our final bullet point is Marxism. If Revelation 13, 16 through 18 is really promoting Marxism or anticipating one world Marxism in the last days, we should see Marxism raise its ugly head all over the world, which it's done, and now raise its head right here in the United States. And so to demonstrate that, look no further than this this article from Fox News, entitled "California Democrats Consider Wealth Tax, including for people who have moved out of the state."
That's unbelievable.
What's that? It reminds me of that song, "Welcome to the Hotel California." Remember that? How you can check in, but you can't check out. I mean, that's the song going in my head when I'm reading this. You can never leave the state of California because we're going to tax you even if you, sorry about the singing. We're going to tax you even if you leave. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Help us with that article.
Now. California lawmakers are pushing legislation that would impose a new tax on the state's wealthiest residents, even if they've already moved to another part of the country. The current version just introduced, notice it said the current version just introduced includes measures to allow California to impose wealth taxes on residents even years after they left the state and moved elsewhere. Exit taxes aren't new in California. The other states were Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Minnesota, New York, and Washington. They also do it.
All blue states.
All blue states.
Notice exit taxes. I didn't know there was such a thing as an exit tax. Exit taxes aren't new in California.
That's right. California lawmakers pushing the wealth tax think they can get around the problem of residents leaving by trying to tax people even after they leave the state, said Patrick Gleason, Vice President of State Affairs at Americans for Tax Reform.
See, there's just one simple word for this. It's called Marxism. And a lot of people would say, oh, it's just a tax on the rich. Sock it to them. I remember when we had the yacht tax. I believe it was in California a few years ago, and all the liberals were like, sock it to those rich people. Well, you have a yacht tax, you destroy the yachting industry, and so you just took away the job of the guy that, the carpenter,
all the people
the painter,
yes,
all the middle class people that are depending on that for their livelihood.
That's right.
And it reminds me of Atlas Shrugged. You reach a point where all the rich people, with all of their factories and businesses, just leave. That's what's happening in California. Gavin Newsom has certainly helped the U-Haul company quite a bit.
Well, I'm telling you, he must have stock.
He must have stock. And, basically that's what will happen. And when the businesses leave, all of the jobs for the middle class, lower class, those disappear as well.
So we can't keep you from leaving, so we're going to hit you one more time.
Yes, and then we're going to hit you on the way out. And not on the way out, after you're already years after you're out. And I was looking at a study years back. I think it was in Fortune or Forbes. I can't remember, but it just dispelled this myth of the wealth tax. It said if you took all of the richest people in the country and you just took everything they owned, you could run the government for about a day.
Yeah, I saw that.
So the wealth tax is never meant to stay with the wealthy. It's always designed eventually to get down into the vast middle class.
That's exactly
and
right.
What's happening in California is these kinds of pieces of legislation are now the norm, because for a few decades now it's been one-party rule.
Yeah.
Democrats running the governorship, supermajority Democrats in the legislative branches, and these are the kind of proposals that you get, essentially kind of veiled over or warmed over Marxism. And the reason this is significant is the saying for a long time has always been, as California goes, so goes the rest of the world. And it's interesting, all of the other blue states that you mentioned there in the article, experimenting with these kinds of exit taxes, wealth taxes, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Washington. I thank God I live in a state like Texas, which to my knowledge has no state income tax. Am I right on that?
That's correct.
And as long as we stand there, it's harder for them to adopt these other Marxist experiments. And so, we bring this to your attention because we think that the Bible anticipates one world Marxism in the last days.
Right.
And so if that's true, Revelation 13, 16 through 18, Marxism would have to spread everywhere, including right here into the late, great United States of America.
Very true.
Well, I hope people enjoyed, I don't know if the word enjoyed is the right word, but are informed concerning this prophecy update. We dealt with about 6 subjects in rapid-fire fashion: Israel and how she's being coerced. And we believe all of these are prophetically significant. The John Kerry, Al Gore globalist agenda at the World Economic Forum, persecution as it's developing internationally and domestically in the abortion counselor case and in the Jack Phillips case, the rapid trajectory into the cashless society with the digital wallet, the surveillance society that's developing, in largely preparatory for Revelation 13, 16 through 18, where technology, originally designed against America's adversaries is now being turned against American citizens, and then experiments with statism or Marxism. Would you add anything to that list?
No, I think you nailed it.
So with all of that being said, Brother Jim, do you have any good news for us?
Well, we always have good news because the Bible has good news. And Titus 2:13 we like to finish up with, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus.
So the world, as Adrian Rogers says, is growing gloriously dark.
Yes,
But the best is yet to come.
that's right.
Because as we move rapidly towards the 7-year tribulation period, and we think that because the stage is being set for it,
Yes.
we have the promise that Jesus is coming back to rescue us.
Yes, we do.
Before the wrath of God hits planet Earth.
Yes.
It's not a promise that we're going to have easy lives,
No.
but it is a promise that we are exempted from divine wrath,
Amen
which
to
will
that.
manifest itself in that 7-year tribulation period. And this is the hope of the rapture of the church. And
Amen.
of course, people out there can change their eternal destiny
That's right.
and be tied into this promise simply by putting their hope, trust, and confidence for their eternity and the safekeeping of their soul into the person of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And we would encourage people to do that now, even as
Amen.
we are speaking. A couple of infomercials. We want to remind you of our prophecy conference that's coming up here at Sugarland Bible Church, February 24th and 25th. The 24th is a Shabbat dinner at nearby Sugar Creek Country Club. Unfortunately, we're all filled up for that, but people can call the church and get on the waiting list for that. But the main conference, and we still have vacancies for that, is February 25th, all day Saturday. It's going to start at 9 o'clock in the morning here at Sugarland Bible Church and end at 6:30 at night, featuring special music by Lev Shalom. And the 3 conference speakers who will each present twice are myself, Olivier Melnick, and Don Perkins. And then the conference will be over. You need to register, though, at the Sugarland Bible Church website to participate in this conference.
Right.
Then the conference will be over, and we would invite people to stick around Sunday morning for church on the 26th. And we have 2 of the conference speakers presenting during our normal church times. Olivier Melnick will present during the Sunday school hour, and Don Perkins will be presenting during the main service. I also want to remind people of the upcoming Chafer Theological Seminary Conference, March 6th through 8th at nearby West Houston Bible Church, featuring Old Testament types of issues, Old Testament archaeology. How do we know that the transmission of the Old Testament that we have is accurate? Those kinds of issues.
Good stuff.
Dr. Randall Price, among others, is going to be
Oh, boy.
presenting.
Yeah.
And, of course, that particular conference is going to be live streamed. So go to the Dean Bible Ministries page to find out about that. I should mention the prior conference that I spoke of, our conference here at Sugarland Bible Church, is going to be live streamed also. So if folks can't make it, we are offering free live streaming. And I would encourage people to follow us in podcast format. What we present here on Pastor's Point of View is now available in podcast format. Also, I would encourage people to go to the App Store and get the app, Andy Woods Ministries, where they can get all of the pastor's points of view there. We upload them all there, and all of our recent teaching that we've done
Good
here
stuff.
at Sugarland Bible Church, audio and video, is available there. And then one other last thing is the Compass Cruise, which is going to be September 28th through October 16th, visiting various Bible lands areas, including Rome and then Egypt as part of the mix. I'm one of the co-teachers on the cruise. We would encourage people to look into that. There's a phone number on the screen for you to call, and then also a link that you can access and become more aware of that cruise coming up at the end of this year. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think I just want to leave with this. God is good all the time.
Amen. And with that, we'll close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.